there was once a garden that everyone thought belonged to the day. In the daylight hours, the path through it was sometimes used as a shortcut, and the benches along the way were places where people sat to check their phones, tie their shoes, or finish a quick conversation before moving on. There were trees and shrubs and flower beds, and a small fountain with a thin thread-like stream of water that whispered over stone. It was a nice garden, people would have said if you had asked them during the day. They might have mentioned the roses in summer, or the way the light fell on the fountain at noon, or how children liked to run briefly along the path before being called back to the sidewalk. But the garden's favorite time was not the day at all. The garden's favorite time began when the last footsteps faded, when the final door to the nearby houses closed with a soft click, and when the sky dimmed enough that the colors of things stopped trying so hard. It began when the lights in the kitchen windows went on one by one, and the garden itself slipped into a gentler, quieter version of itself. Behind one of those kitchen windows lived a person named Mira. Mira's days were full of messages, small decisions, and dozens of little tasks, each one not so heavy on its own, but together making a kind of invisible backpack that she carried around in her mind. She switched between tabs, conversations, and thoughts like someone crossing a busy street over and over again. Sometimes, by the evening, the straps of that backpack felt too tight, even though she could not see them. On most days, Mira did what many people do, told herself she would rest later. Later, after one more email, one more message, one more check of the calendar. Later, after she read the news, after she thought about tomorrow. Later, when everything was in order. Somehow, later always kept moving away from her, like the horizon on a long road. Mira liked the garden, but for a long time, she only knew it as the place she hurried through when she was late. The place with a bench she sometimes noticed when she walked back from the bus stop. She knew there were trees, and she knew there was a fountain, and she knew there were flowers that changed with the seasons. But she did not know that, at night, the garden quietly woke up in a different way. One evening, Mira closed her laptop and realized that the room around her felt too full of all the things she had been thinking about. The air felt heavy with the remains of tasks that were finished and tasks that were not, like dust that had nowhere to go. The little sounds of her apartment, refrigerator hum, distant pipes, seemed sharper than usual, as if they were asking for her attention too. She stood up, stretched, and looked out of the window. Outside, the sky was deepening, not yet fully dark, but no longer daytime. The garden path, just beyond the fence, was empty. A faint light glowed near the fountain, a small lamp that came on automatically every night, whether anyone was there to see it or not. The surrounding buildings were beginning to show their evening windows, soft rectangles of gold and white. Without thinking very much about it, Mira put on a sweater and her most comfortable shoes. The sweater smelled faintly of laundry soap and something like sunshine, a memory of being dried near an open window. She stepped out of her door, locked it without really noticing the motion, and walked toward the garden gate. The air outside was cooler than in her apartment, with a hint of damp earth and something green and living, as if the plants had exhaled after a long day and the air was carrying their sigh. The gate was slightly squeaky, but tonight the sound was soft, as if the hinges had decided to whisper instead of complain. Mira pushed it open and walked through, letting the gate close behind her with a small, careful click. The path ahead was simple. a loop around the fountain, with small branches leading off toward benches and a cluster of trees. Low lanterns along the path were set into the ground, and at this hour they glowed with a modest, steady light, not bright enough to erase the shadows, just enough to draw a thin line of safety between the beds of plants. There was no one else there. The last jogger had gone home, the last dog had been walked, and the last child had been called inside. The garden was not empty, though. It felt quietly full of itself, of its stones and leaves and soil and water, of all the roots beneath the path and all the branches above it. Mira walked slowly, more slowly than she would have during the day. Her feet felt the slight give of the path beneath her, the soft crunch of gravel, and the occasional smoothness of packed earth. The lamp by the fountain gave off a gentle, mellow light, not bright enough to chase away the shadows, only enough to show where things were. A nearby tree cast a dark silhouette, its leaves making a filigree pattern at the edge of the light. She came to the fountain and sat down on the edge of a low wall beside it. The stone under her felt cool, but not cold. It held the memory of the day's warmth in its center. The water made a sound that was not quite a trickle and not quite a stream, something in between, regular and calm. She could hear the drops meeting the surface below, each one merging without fuss into what was already there. A small ring formed where each drop landed, spreading out in circles that overlapped and disappeared over and over with no rush and no complaint. For a few moments, Mira simply sat and listened. The sounds of the city beyond the garden were still present. Distant cars, a muffled voice, the faint pulse of music from somewhere, but they seemed to be happening in another room, behind a thick, soft curtain. Here, in the garden, the loudest sound was the small fountain doing its work without hurry. As her eyes adjusted, details began to appear. The outline of a tree trunk, the round shape of a bush, the dark pattern of branches against the sky. Leaves shivered now and then with a breeze that she could barely feel, like someone quietly breathing. Small plants at the feet of the larger shrubs formed shadows that looked like little islands. Mira had the sense suddenly that the garden had been waiting for this, not specifically for her, but for this hour, this quiet, this chance to be itself. It did not feel like a park that belonged to the town. It felt like a room belonging to the night, a place where days' leftover thoughts could dissolve. She exhaled slowly, a long breath that seemed to leave her body in stages. With it went the image of her inbox, the list of things she had not done, the worry about what tomorrow might bring. They did not disappear all at once, but they stepped back, giving more space to the sound of the fountain and the feeling of the bench beneath her. The muscles in her neck and shoulders, which had been slightly tensed for so long that she barely noticed, softened by a small but important degree. After a while, Mira noticed something else. The scent of the garden had changed. In the day, the strongest smells were cut grass and sun-warmed stone, and sometimes car exhaust passing by. At night, the air carried something softer, damp soil, a faint floral sweetness from flowers that seemed to breathe more deeply in the cool, and the clean, neutral smell of water. Somewhere nearby, a plant released a fragrance that reminded her faintly of honey and chamomile. She leaned back slightly and looked up. Between the silhouettes of the taller trees, the sky was now a deeper blue, with a few stars beginning to appear. They did not shout their presence. They simply showed up, one by one, like small, patient candles. A thin line of cloud drifted slowly across, its edges blurring into the darkness. Mira thought, without urgency, about how many nights the garden had done this without her, how many evenings it had watched the sky darken, listened to the sounds fade, and settled into itself. The garden, she realized, did not mind whether anyone noticed. It was willing to be quiet, even if no one came. The idea felt strangely kind. Here was a place that did not require anything from her, not productivity, not cleverness, not decision-making. The garden would be what it was whether she worried or not. Her presence did not improve it, and her absence did not damage it. For someone whose days were full of things that needed her attention, this was a new kind of relief. She could simply be here, and that was enough. After sitting for some time that did not feel measured in minutes, Mira stood up and began to walk the path again, slower now. As she moved, she noticed little details she had never seen before. The way the path curved slightly around a particular tree, as if giving it space to stretch its roots. The small lantern tucked near a bench, its glass a bit fogged from the humidity, the light inside soft and steady. A cluster of small white flowers close to the ground, almost glowing in the low light, their petals half closed, as if they were also drifting toward sleep. She passed a patch of flowers that looked almost colorless in the dimness and realized that at night their shapes and shadows mattered more than their colors. She could not tell if they were pink or yellow or red. She only knew that they were there, their petals slightly closed, their stems relaxed. A line of low hedges guided the path gently without fencing it in. On the far side of the loop, there was a bench beneath a low, spreading tree. The branches arched over it like a ceiling, leaves forming a pattern against the sky. A few leaves, older than the rest, had curled slightly at the edges. Mira sat down again, this time deeper in the garden, farther from the entrance, closer to the darker stillness at its center. She rested her hands in her lap and let her back lean against the bench. The wood was cool, but not cold. It had the smoothness of something that had been used often, and the steady strength of something that did not need to prove itself. Grain lines ran under her fingertips where the varnish had worn a little. Her thoughts, once busy and fast, now moved more like the fountain water, steady, gentle, repeating. One thought surfaced, I should sleep soon. Another followed, there is still so much to do. Then, as if the garden itself had quietly intervened, another thought came that was not a task or a worry. It was simply, right now, I am sitting on a bench in a quiet garden. She let that thought sit there for a while, like a small stone in her palm. No analysis, no conclusion, just the simple acknowledgement of this one single fact. The more she focused on it, the more real it felt. Right now, she was sitting on a bench. The night air was cool on her cheeks. The leaves above her made a soft sound when the breeze moved through them, a sound like pages turned very gently. Far off, water fell in small, consistent streams at the fountain. A distant window closed somewhere beyond the hedge with a dull, padded thump. The tension in her shoulders, which had become such a constant companion that she barely noticed it, began to ease. It did not vanish, but it loosened its grip like a knotted rope that had finally been given permission to untie itself. In the dim light, a small moth drifted past, its wings pale and almost transparent. It moved in a slow, uncertain pattern, as if it had all the time in the world to decide where to go. It hovered near the bench for a moment, then moved toward the nearest lantern, circled once, and drifted away again, unsatisfied or simply curious. Mira watched it for a moment, then let her gaze soften again. She found that she did not need to focus sharply on anything for the garden to feel real. The blur of shapes and shadows was enough. Her body knew the bench was beneath her, and the path was in front of her, and the trees were around her, even if her eyes did not study them closely. Somewhere, a branch creaked gently, settling under its own weight, as if it too were relaxing after holding itself upright all day. Somewhere, a tiny insect sang a note so thin it could barely be called sound, a small persistent thread in the fabric of the night. Somewhere, a cat padded along a fence at the edge of the garden and then stopped to look at the quiet human on the bench before moving on, deciding she posed no threat to its slow patrol. Mira closed her eyes. Nothing changed. The garden was still there in the sounds, in the feel of the air, in the way her body relaxed. She did not need to see it to know it was holding her in its soft, leaf-scented space. With her eyes closed, she became aware of her breathing in a new way. In, the coolness of air entering her nose, filling her chest. Out, the warmth leaving, taking with it a little more of the day each time. The rhythm was simple and reliable, like footsteps along a path she knew by heart. She did not try to breathe in any special pattern. She just noticed that slow, natural motion and allowed it to continue. The garden seemed to breathe with her, the leaves rising and falling with the breeze, the fountain offering its steady exhale of water. Her mind, which had once run ahead of her like a dog on a long leash, now walked at her side, calm and quiet. Thoughts still appeared now and then, but they were softer, like clouds drifting across a wide sky instead of sharp stones underfoot. Each one came, and each one passed, without needing to be chased. At one point, she remembered something small she had forgotten to do that day, a message she had meant to send. The thought rose bright for a moment, and then, in the cool stillness of the garden, it dulled and settled. She realized she could simply do it tomorrow. The garden did not argue with her or suggest otherwise. It seemed to say without words that the world would wait. She stayed like that for a long, gentle stretch of time. Her body registered comfort, the weight of gravity holding her to the earth, the support of the bench, the coolness of the air on her skin, the warmth of her sweater around her. Her feet felt pleasantly tired instead of aching. Her hands rested open instead of clenched. Her mind registered space, enough space between thoughts to feel the stillness underneath, enough space to remember that she was more than the sum of her tasks. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed the hour, the sound softened by distance and leaves. Mira did not count the chimes. They passed through her awareness like a flock of birds crossing the sky, seen but not followed. Eventually, without hurry, Mira opened her eyes again. The garden looked the same and also a little different. Nothing had changed in it, but something had changed in her. The invisible backpack of the day felt lighter, as if some of its contents had quietly slipped out and melted into the ground. The path ahead seemed familiar now, not as a route to somewhere else, but as a gentle line back toward home. She stood up slowly, stretching her arms overhead, feeling the length of her spine and the gentle pull of her muscles. A faint crackle sounded in her shoulders as tension released. There was no rush to go back, and yet she knew that, sooner or later, she would. The garden, she sensed, had done what it needed to do. As she walked back along the path, she glanced once more at the fountain, at the lamp, at the gate. The fountain kept pouring its thin, measured stream unbothered by time. The lamp kept its small circle of light. A few leaves had fallen onto the path while she arranging themselves in patterns that no one would ever fully notice. She knew that tomorrow people would walk through this same space in daylight, thinking about their own plans and conversations, perhaps not noticing the way the garden held them. That was all right. The garden did not insist on being noticed. Its work did not depend on recognition. She stepped through the gate, letting it close softly behind her. The street felt different now, quieter, even though the same sounds were there. The pavement under her feet was the same pavement she had walked on thousands of times, but her steps were slower, less urgent. Her apartment window glowed gently ahead. When she entered her home, the air inside felt less heavy than before. The objects around her, table, chair, cup on the counter, seemed to have stepped back a little instead of pressing in. She turned off a few lights, leaving just one small lamp on near her bed. The room folded itself into calm shadows. As she lay down, she did not replay the day. She did not rehearse tomorrow. She did not weigh herself with should have and have to. Instead, her mind wandered back just a little to the bench under the tree and the sound of the fountain. The memory was simple, like a small photograph, not full of detail, just enough to remind her of the feeling of air on her face, wood against her back, and water moving steadily nearby. The garden outside continued its night, watching the sky and listening to the quiet, whether or not anyone sat there. A few hours from now, dawn would begin to thin the darkness, and birds would test their voices, and the garden would slowly change its shape again for the day. But for now, it was still in its favorite time, and somewhere in that quiet space, the warmth of Mira's presence still lingered like the fading echo of a soft footstep. In her room, Mira's breathing found a rhythm that matched it. In, out. The muscles in her face softened, her jaw unclenched. Her hands, which so often hovered over keys and screens, now rested against the sheets, fingers slightly curled in peace rather than tension. Thoughts grew softer. They stretched out, lost their edges, and became more like colors and fewer like sentences. Her body grew heavier in the pleasant way that meant it trusted the bed to hold it. The invisible backpack of the day, now nearly empty, waited by the door of her mind, knowing it could be picked up again tomorrow, if needed, a little lighter than before. For now, there was only this: the slow settling of muscles, the gentle unclenching of the jaw, the warmth of blankets, the distant memory of leaves and water, the quiet assurance that somewhere outside a garden was still awake, keeping company with the night. The garden did not need her attention. It would be there when night came again. And as that knowledge sank a little deeper pierced into her, like roots into soil, Mira's thoughts loosened one by one, slipped quietly into the dark, and sleep, unhurried and kind, came to sit beside her, staying as long as she needed.